don't see me or some of the points that I've made, but God, they just see you and that you speaking to their heart. God, we give honor and glory and praise in advance for what you're going to do. In Jesus' name, everybody said amen. Thank you for standing. You may be seated. It was neat to see Sister Kendall and C3 Kids talk about the longer version of Sleeping Beauty. There's actually two before Walt Disney did his, and we won't be covering those because we'll get way down in the weeds. But let me give you a recap of the 1959 $6 million, most expensive of the time, Disney production, one that to say Walt Disney's his last one he actually worked on, because just like the kids, I started talking to adults this week, and I said, hey, what do you know about Sleeping Beauty? And they say, I don't know. And people just, they don't even remember it. So let me give you the recap. In a faraway land long ago lived a king and his fair queen. In many years had they longed for a child, and finally their wish was granted. A daughter was born, and they named her Aurora. Yes, they named her after the dawn, for she filled their lives with sunshine. And then a great holiday was proclaimed throughout the kingdom so that all of the people, high and low state, might pay homage to the infant princess. And our story begins on that most joyful day. The King Stephen and his queen received their friends, King Hubert and Prince Philip, and they wanted to unite their kingdoms by marriage with their children, Princess Aurora and Prince Philip. The king and queen also received three good fairies as guests, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. They were supposed to give one each to the newborn princesses, and Flora gave her beauty, and Fauna gave her the gift of song. And when Merryweather was about to do the same, an evil witch called Maleficent appeared, and she was very angry because she had not received an invitation, and she decided to give a gift as well. She said, the princess shall indeed grow in grace and beauty, be loved by all who know her. But before the sun sets on her 16th birthday, she shall prick her finger on the spindle of a wheel and die. And everybody was shocked, but the third fairy had not given her gift yet, so she tried to repair as much as possible the curse of Maleficent. The princess would sleep instead of dying, and the spell be broken with the first true love's kiss of the princess. And King Stephen, in order to prevent the curse to happen, said that every spinning wheel in the kingdom should be burnt. And so it happened. There's so much in here that I had to pause and say, I can't get to every lesson. But the first lesson would be that fear causes us to do stupid things. Could you imagine saying, we're going to take every spinning wheel out of the kingdom? How are you going to make clothes? How are you going to do anything? What happened to commerce? What are we going to do? Fear causes us to do stupid things, but if I was a good preacher, I'd stay there, but I got to keep going. And so it happened, and nevertheless, the three good fairies thought that what they did would not stop Maleficent from accomplishing her revenge, and so they planned to raise Aurora in the deep forest until the age of 16. And when the curse finished, then they would take the princess to the castle again with her parents. And the king and queen accepted this plan, but they were brokenhearted. Many sad and lonely years had passed for King Stephen and his people, but as the time for the princess' 16th birthday drew near, the entire kingdom began to rejoice. For everyone knew that as long as Maleficent's domain, the Forbidden Mountains, thundered with her wrath and frustration, her evil prophecy had not yet been fulfilled. Meanwhile, in the forest, although Aurora grew up without knowing that she was the daughter of a king and a queen, she was very happy with the three peasants, the fairies that had raised her, who named her now Briar Rose. And if I was a good preacher, I'd stop and say there that your identity is not based on your geography. She didn't know who she was, but she was happy. She didn't know where she was in the forest, but she didn't realize that she's supposed to be in the castle, but I can't stop there because we've got to get to our assignment. See, one day the three good fairies were planning a party for the princess because her 16th birthday was approaching. And while Aurora was picking some berries, and it was then that she met a young man, they fell in love with each other immediately. And the story goes on to say Aurora said that they would meet at her cottage in the evening, and she came back home. When she arrived at the cottage, she told the good fairies about the young man she had just met, and they told her the story of her birth and the curse, as well as her future marriage with Prince Philip. In the evening, Aurora arrived at the castle for the party, and when she was alone in her new bedroom, If you watch the old movie, the fire goes out in the fireplace, and a shadow of Maleficent appears just for an instant, and then there's only a ball of green light visible. And Aurora falls under Maleficent's spell and starts to walk towards the light, and she walks slowly up the staircase. The princess follows the light into a room in the tower where the light turns into the spinning wheel. Aurora starts to reach towards it with her left hand, and in a flash of light, Aurora touches the spindle with her finger, falling into a deep sleep. The three good fairies placed Aurora on a bed in the tower and made all the kingdom sleep until the spell was broken, because they did not want the king and the queen to find out that her daughter fell under the curse of Maleficent, and they also wanted the princess to make sure when she woke up that she'd be accompanied by all the people she knew and loved. The fairies went to look for Prince Philip, but Maleficent found him first. She captures him, the only man that could break the spell with true love's first kiss, and she took him to the Forbidden Mountains, and then the good fairies followed them to rescue the prince. And the fairies helped him to escape and to fight the evil witch when she discovered that he was not in the tower. Philip ran to the castle of Aurora, but the evil witch cast a spell that caused the growth of thick and thorny bushes, so the prince had to stop before them. But he stops only shortly, and then Philip starts cutting away with his sword, and finally he's through. And then suddenly Maleficent transforms herself into a huge dragon. And suddenly Maleficent transformed herself into a huge dragon and fought with the prince, who won the battle with the help of the three good fairies. And then, when the evil witch was finally dead, Philip and the fairies get inside the castle and up into the tower where Aurora lies on her bed. And Philip walks slowly towards her and gives her a faint kiss on her lips. Aurora awakens. Philip sees Philip and begins to smile. Then everyone in the kingdom awakened as well, and Princess Aurora and Prince Philip appeared arm in arm walking down the stairs. Both kneeled down before the throne, and Aurora embraced her mother. That's a lot of story in a little bit of time. But there's an account in Scripture that this fairy tale could have been crafted after, for all you people that are ready to jump out the window because I'm preaching on Snow White or Sleeping Beauty. Whatever I'm preaching about. It's found in Mark chapter 5, verse 21 and 24, and 35 through 43. The New Living Translation says, Jesus got into a boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. Pleading fervently with him, "My little daughter is dying," he said, "Please come and lay your hands on her, heal her so she can live." And Jesus went with them, and all the people followed, crowding around him. While she was still speaking to her, messengers arrived from the home of, do you all say Jairus or Jairus? How y'all say it? How do you say it? Jairus? Like he went to Jared and Jairus? One called Jairus, Jairus, you know what I'm talking about. So he went to the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, and they told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the master now." But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, that don't be afraid, just have faith. Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brothers of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. He went inside and asked, "Why is all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead, she's only asleep." The crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave. And when he took the girl's father and mother and the three disciples into the room where the girl was lying, holding her hand, he said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around, and they were overwhelmed and totally amazed. And Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened. And when he told them to give her something to eat. It's a lot of intro, but the stories are similar. Parents confronted with disaster. A child that was once full of life and hope and potential and promise, overtaken by the curse of death. Hope became hopelessness. Promise traded in for pain. Destiny for despair. Then the hero walks in. A prince from a far-off place arrives on the scene, and death, or sleep if you will, is interrupted by a miracle. And both accounts teach us some important essential truths. Are you ready for it? Let's see if I can put both of them together. The first truth we can learn from Sleeping Beauty, as well as the story of the 12-year-old girl, Jairus' daughter, is pain does not respect position. The account opens with Jesus returning from the town of Capernaum, and he is met by a crowd of people who are eagerly waiting for him. And one man in the crowd was called Jairus. And we are told in verse 41 that he was a ruler of the synagogue. He was a man who had an important position in the local church. He was a respected man, a religious man. Many people had looked up to him, but he was hurting. See, hurting and pain does not respect position. Rich people hurt. Poor people hurt. The famous as well as the forgotten, they hurt. And Jairus and his whole family were hurting because their daughter was sick and dying. Mark's account even goes further and gives us the detail that this was their only daughter. Like King Stephen and his queen who watched helplessly as their only daughter's future was being cut short, Jairus was left to watch his beautiful little girl's future being robbed from her, because in that time frame, when at the age of 12, she was almost old enough to be given in marriage. That culture was definitely totally different than ours, but she is just about the point to start her life on her own, and now death came knocking at the door. See, some of you have been in this situation, and others of us can only imagine how hard it would be to sit beside the one who was dying and you couldn't do anything for, and you couldn't do anything to change the situation. It's hard, it's heart-wrenching, and it's painful. That's why Jairus doesn't give a second thought of throwing himself at Jesus' feet and begging him to come to heal his daughter. We can go on and say how hard it would have been for him to be a ruler of the synagogue, to come to Jesus, to admit that he was the exact same one that was persecuting him and talking bad about him, calling him a heretic and everything else. It would be so humbling for him to come and ask Jesus. But when death comes knocking at your door and tragedy hits your home, you lose your arrogance real quick and you learn to be humble. See, the next lesson we can learn from Sleeping Beauty, as well as our story in the text of Mark, is your plans and your purpose, they won't always match. See, Jesus agreed to help despite probably being a bit weary from his trip across the lake. He started to make his way through the narrow streets to Jairus' house, and the crowd were still milling around waiting to see yet another miracle. There was jostling and there was bumping, and the progress, I'm sure, wasn't quick as Jairus would have liked. But then Jesus stopped. Why? What's wrong? There isn't time for this, Jesus. A young girl is dying. But Jesus asked a strange question in verse 45. Who touched me? You see, in our text, we jump right over this, but in between Jairus going to Jesus and Jesus actually getting there, we are interrupted by the woman with the issue of blood. See, the answer was simple. Probably 100 people in the crowd have touched Jesus in the last hour. The crowd was thronging, but Jesus persisted that there was someone who deliberately touched him. I know that power has gone out of me, he said. Jesus was right. Luke fills in the gaps that in that crowd, along with Jairus, was another person who was hurting and needing hope as well as healing. There was a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. This likely would have been a constant menstrual bleeding, and we can only imagine the difficult situations this would have caused. Embarrassment, limitations, annoyance, it was all there. But it was even worse in that culture and in that day, because when a woman was bleeding in their menstrual cycle, they were considered unclean. They were not permitted to participate in temple rituals or worship. They were not permitted to be intimate with their husbands. This woman had been bleeding for 12 years. That's over a decade that this woman, the Mark's gospel says that she has spent all her money on doctors trying to get the problem fixed, and it only got worse. But things get worse than this. Because she was considered unclean, if anyone even touched her, they too would be considered unclean. And then they'd be forced to go through a cleansing ritual before being allowed to worship again. And not only did this woman have to put up with bleeding for 12 years, she was also socially isolated from others in society, including her own husband. She was as good as barren because she was not permitted to have intercourse. Spiritually, she was cut off from the temple. She was embarrassed, rejected, isolated, ostracized, and at the end of her tether, and she was hurting awful bad. In contrast, this with Jairus and this woman is interesting. If you look at both of them, one was prominent, the other was anonymous. One was deeply religious, the other one's condition kept her from worship. Jairus' need was public, but her need was deeply private. But Jesus was there for both and was willing to heal their hurts. This woman approached Jesus in the safety and the relative anonymity of the crowd, and the Bible says she reached out and touched the hem of his garment, and instantly she was healed. She thought no one was aware of the episode and definitely didn't want to hold Jesus up from doing anything important, all those emergencies, but Jesus did know. He didn't just know, he stopped. But this story shows that God is concerned about all of our concerns in our innermost and our hurts, whether they be great or minor. It doesn't matter how big we think they are, how small they think they are. If they're a concern to us, it makes them a concern to Jesus. And Jesus stopped to help a nameless woman with an embarrassing problem, which definitely wasn't life-threatening. So if he'll do that, he's going to help us as well. So Jesus stopped and asked who touched him. The woman, realizing that she had been noticed, came forward trembling. What was Jesus going to say? Would he reprimand her? Would he reverse the healing? No, Jesus speaks with compassion and love and calls her daughter. But why did Jesus expose her? When you read this, do you get past the miracle? Do you ask yourself, why, Jesus? If you knew, why did you even say anything? Why would you expose her? She's embarrassed anyway. She's been ostracized for 12 years. Nobody will even come close to her. Why would you do this, Jesus? Why would you make the matters worse? Why would he make it public? And I believe that he wanted to establish a relationship, not just perform a nameless act. He wanted her faith to be in a person and not his robe. If he wouldn't have said anything, she would have thought it was the garment. No, it wasn't the garment, dear. It was the one who was wearing the garment. He wanted everyone to know that she had physically been healed. Why? So she could be completely healed, so that she would never, or she could enter social life again. And so she could celebrate with her. Everybody could celebrate with her. He wanted this. Jesus wants us to be completely healed. Healed physically, spiritually, emotionally, all these hurts that we're carrying. He says, I don't want you just to be another anonymous miracle. I want you to know who did this. And it wasn't the edge of my garment that did it. It was because of me. And I want everybody else to know you're completely healed so I can restore your life. It's been robbed from you for 12 years, but I'm going to give it back to you. And so this woman went away healed from her hurt. Now, I asked Nora to do something really romantic on Friday night. I said, hey, baby, why don't we turn on Disney Plus and watch Sleeping Beauty again? Just to refresh my memory, because I'm just a hopeless romantic, yes. And so we're watching this, and so we got the subtitles in Spanish. We're watching it, and I'm like, man, this is old. And it's just like, but this was cutting edge technology. In fact, the part where the three fairies take Aurora, which people don't even know her name, they just call her Sleeping Beauty all the time, which is, it's really bad that you know by her condition and not by her real name, but we've already talked about that, so I won't preach on that. But they take Aurora back to the castle on her birthday. And what seems like minutes before sunset, Maleficent tricks her into touching the spindle. 15 plus years careful planning and preparation down the drain in an instant. And Nora asked me almost rhetorically, why didn't they wait? Why did they go back on her birthday? Didn't they know the evil witch would be expecting them? Not to mention, none of this would have happened if you watched the movie if those two fairies weren't in some kind of War of the Wands about the color of the princess's dress. The only reason everything got messed up is because they were doing something they shouldn't. They were good for 15 years, put the wands up, but because they want to throw a birthday party, they got it back out and messed everything up. Sometimes your plans don't match your purpose. See, we pick up the story and just in time to see the gloom and doom boys come. So you read, okay, Jesus going to Jairus' house. Then the woman with the issue of blood, oh, that's great. And then it comes right back into the next scene. Hey, got some news for you. And with the tact of a steamroller, they crushed the hopes of this believing Jairus. She's dead, they intone. Why bother her now? Why bother the master now? What a crushing blow. Jairus must have felt gutted. If only Jesus hadn't stopped. If only Jesus had returned one day earlier, but now it's too late for anyone to do anything. Which leads us to our next lesson, that delay doesn't mean denial. How often do we give up on God? Oh, not us, Pastor. I would suggest often. We think that our situation is too desperate, too far gone for even God to do anything about. But that's rubbish. Jesus turns to Jairus in verse 30 and says, don't be afraid, just believe me and she'll be healed. Just trust me. Okay. Then Jesus looks at the religious leaders and says, in effect, basically, Jairus, the final chapter of the story hasn't been written just yet. Believe, just believe, which would be ridiculously hard. It's easy to read, hard to do. But getting back to our story, Jesus takes his inner circle, Peter, James, and John along, and they approach the house, and the Bible says they saw much commotion. Now, I read this, I'm sure you read a lot, and it's like, okay, there's a little bit of noise going on. It's more than that. It's certainly much commotion. The awful sound of mourning filled the air. There was no quiet organ music playing peacefully in the background. It was something totally different. So you need to understand the Jewish custom of the day. If you read in the Mishnah, which is basically the written account of the oral traditions of the Jews, is that you had to have, to send somebody off, you had to have at least 2 flute players and 1 woman mourner. So there's a short time between death and the burial of a body, so mourning would begin soon, almost instantly. The mourners would tear their garments in grief. Then they had professional mourners who would often be hired, usually women who would wail loudly the name of the deceased. And every once in a while, above the awful wailing of the mourners, the noise of flutes would be heard. And those were loud, discerning sounds, signaling emotional discord and deep grief and pain. And since Jairus was an important official, we'd expect that many mourners had been secured and the flute players had been raised. Quite a ruckus. I'm sure they were doing their very best. But if flute players, professional wailers, and lamenters were present at the death of the little girl, it caused me to ask who hired them. See, Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, was with Jesus when his daughter died. Although he would be responsible for hiring the people, he didn't do so. In fact, his desire to see Jesus, that he might heal his little girl, suggests that Jairus would not even be prepared to have hired mourners via one of his servants. Jairus was expecting Jesus to heal a sick daughter, not come back to a dead one. See, the position in the community suggests wealth. He was a ruler. It seems, too, that the crowd of mourners was aware of Jairus' wealth. And they want to take advantage of it by hovering around his daughter, waiting for her to die, that they might get paid for their services. So the next lesson we can learn is the obstacles appear the closer you get. See, Prince Philip got close to the castle, more obstacles started showing up. Remember, Kendall said that as soon as he got to the castle, all these thorns, it was almost impossible to pass, thorns all around the castle. And it wasn't just that. Then you had to get, at the last ditch effort, you're cutting through the thorns. And then that crazy Maleficent turns into a dragon. See, when Jairus and Jesus arrived at the ruler's house, the Lord drove out the mourners, asking Jairus to trust in him concerning the girl. This is crucial, and I got to be honest, I've missed it for years. By allowing Jesus to drive out the crowd, he'd be denying payment of the mourners on the basis that the girl was not dead. Remarkably, we see how much Jairus risked when he sided with Jesus in crucial juncture. Not only would he have to pay extra of these mourners if Jesus failed, he would lose face before the people, and his livelihood may as well have been on the line as well as the life of his precious daughter. By allowing Jesus to dismiss the mourners, Jairus showed incredible faith. So Jesus and his 3 disciples and Jairus all enter Jesus' home, and his response to the mourners is why. So we got so much to go on here, but every time you got to understand is that delay doesn't mean denial. It's almost like it's not even fair to put the women with the issue of blood in the middle of the story. Could you imagine the desperation? Have you ever been in a hurry? No, Pastor, what is a hurry? Do you know how you feel when somebody interrupts you from completing a task that you're in a hurry to? Could you imagine how long that interaction must have felt to that father of the dying girl? So delay doesn't mean denial. But now he's getting closer to the house, and here's more obstacles. He goes, all of a sudden, everybody knows that Jairus is rich, and so, hey, why don't all the professional mourners come on out? We'll just come on out and get paid. So if they're out there, and the girl, you can imagine that they were out there before waiting for her to die. See, the next step we got to learn from both the biblical account and our fairy tale is don't mistake sleep for death. Sleep can be mistaken for death. The fairy tale teaches that. But notice the contrast in the text. Jesus, for whom death was a mere technicality. They, for whom it represented much more than finality. Jesus, thinking on the eternal. The rest of the people considering anything, not considering anything beyond the grave finality of the now. Jesus with the power over a raging sea, a raving maniac, as he would demonstrate over ravaging death. And they had no power at all. He with the heart of sincere compassion, they insincere in their mourning, mercenaries with little concern. The mourners weren't genuine. They were simply a milling crowd ready for hire. They cared less about the girl more than they cared about their own pocketbooks. And their professional hypocrisy becomes transparent when their less sincere lament turns into laughter at the suggestion by our Lord that the girl was only sleeping. Why did they laugh? Why did they laugh? For years, why did they laugh? Their laughing is because they were there to get paid. It was almost like, please, we do this for a living. This girl is dead. Don't think for a minute that we're not getting paid. And so Jesus, I love this. See, the people's grief was insincere. Their compassion was false compassion. Their faith in Jesus was non-existent, but it didn't stop Jesus. I love the fact that people around me have no bearing on what Jesus wants to do in my life. I think it's awesome. He just tossed them out and went to responding to the one who had faith, Jairus. He kicked everybody out. He didn't require everybody in the house to have faith. He didn't say, well, your faith is overriding everybody else's doubt. He said, I'll find one with faith and do what I want to do anyway. I love the fact that it says in verse 41, holding her hand, he said to her, Talitha cum, which means little girl, get up. We lose a lot in our English translation. First, Luke translated Jesus Aramaic into Greek, but Mark kept it in the Aramaic. Jesus used the diminutive for child. In that culture, diminutive was used as a pet name. Literally, Jesus was saying something like honey, sweetie, or sugar. Second, when Jesus said arise, he wasn't saying get up from the dead. He was using a term that simply meant get up. Basically, Jesus was doing what Jairus did every morning when he went into his little daughter's room and took her by the head and said, honey, it's time to wake up. Do you see the incredible power of Jesus? Death is the greatest enemy that we have. Death is our most feared and dreaded enemy. Jesus does not go in the room, roll up his sleeves, recite a bunch of hocus pocus incantations, wave his coat over the little girl and raise her back to life. No, he leans over and says, hey, baby, why don't you get up? It's powerful. Jesus spoke to her as if death was nothing but sleep. That's the power of Jesus. He just said, your doubt is not going to stop me. I need one person with faith, and I'll lean over your tragedy and speak to it like it's nothing. Man, don't mistake sleep for death. Here's what that means. Jesus saying that if you believe in him, then you don't have to be afraid of death. The greatest and final human enemy that we all face, death, is nothing more than a good night's sleep to Jesus. See, the account teaches us that there are some things in your life that seem long gone. Dreams that seem to cease, promises that seem improbable, too late, too far gone, hopeless and lifeless. But when the prince from a far off place arrives on the scene, he can speak life into your dream again. So, what promise have you given up on? What dream has been asleep so long that you sit by while others conduct funerals over it? Some of us just need to allow our dreams to become awakened. So you don't mistake sleep for death. Jesus calls on us to trust him. Now, I rushed through all that to get into one thing that's not even in the story. I was researching this on Google because every 44-year-old man needs to research Sleeping Beauty. They have a forum. Do you remember the names of the three fairies? There'll be a test afterwards. Meriwether never gave her original gift. There's forums, Paul. Forums. People trying to figure out what was her original gift going to be. Because she was going to get the gift, but she didn't. So all she did was, instead of using her original gift, she changed her gift so that Aurora, Sleeping Beauty, would not die, but she'd only sleep. So there's forums, like real people forums, trying to figure out what Meriwether's gift was. What's the last lesson? The last lesson is don't let what could have been rob you what is. They're spending all the time saying, what would it have been like if that didn't happen in my life? What would it have been like if Maleficent never walked in the room? We got people that act like that forum. What would it be like if this didn't happen in my life? What would it be like if this didn't happen? Would you please stop letting what could have been rob you what is right now? Would you change anything, Pastor? I wouldn't change anything in my life. I have a beautiful family, got beautiful children. I got a great church. I got a loving God. What else do I need? I'm not going to change anything. And I bet your bottom dollar, I am not going to let what could have been rob me of what I have right now. You got people that are waiting to live, and they're spending their actual life based on what could have been, never actually living their life. You got people still wearing their high school ring. Sorry if you have your high school ring on there, may the Lord bless you richly. You still got people paying to get in the yearbook so everybody knows that you scored such and so many touchdowns in 1980 something. Nobody cares about that. We got people living in the past. You can see it all the time. Just watch them. I don't live in the past, Pastor. Yes, you do. Everything about a person is stuck in a year. There comes a time where we stop developing and we stop. So it's like, hey, I talked about it before. If you're in the Stonewash jeans era, you just stop right there in the 90s. You just park, just build a condominium in Stonewash. And there's people that still wear the tie-dye. And there's people that do this. And people that got the hair. Why? It's because that was what they considered their best they ever were. And so they stay there. And they live in perpetual what could have been. Oh, if I wouldn't have got married, I could have went to medical school. No, you don't. You had D's and F's. You ain't going to medical school. Stop lying to yourself and be thankful for what you have now. Now, y'all want to talk to me now, do you? See, we can spend the rest of our lives wondering what could have been instead of actually spending the rest of our lives living it. So let me recap for you. Pain does not respect position. Pain does not care if you go to church every Sunday. Pain doesn't care you've been baptized in Jesus' name and talk in tongues. Pain doesn't care that you pay tithes and that you're kind and you're good. Pain does not care. It is not prejudice. It'll attack black, white, Hispanic, Asian. It doesn't matter what it, big, short, fat, skinny. It'll attack. Pain does not respect your position. And your plans and your purpose won't always match because you plan it all out. And God says, no, that's my purpose. My purpose is different. Why? Because Jairus was walking in Jesus' purpose. His purpose was to heal the sick, so he wouldn't walk by his purpose to get to Jairus' house. He says, Jesus refused to walk by his purpose. Said, look, I'll deal with the issue of blood, and I'll deal with your daughter. Why? Because it's all in my purpose, but it wasn't in Jairus' plan. And so how many people get frustrated because you plan it all out, and God's laughing at your plan because your purpose is a little bit different. Delay doesn't always mean denial. I like instant. I want instant everything. I want it fast. I want it on demand. I even look on Amazon to see if I get it the same day. I like fast, but delay doesn't mean denial. You know, Movie Matt and I were talking about it before, is that I got to teach my kids sometimes, hey, I'm not telling you no, just not now. I might as well just throat chop them because anything but yes is devastating. We never grow out of it. We just get jobs and have money and buy the stuff that our parents wouldn't. But we do not like delay at all. But God doesn't work that way. Delay is not denial. Jesus said, I came across the lake. I'm going to your house. Don't rush me. Jesus' purpose is, hey, I'm going to heal everybody along the way. Well, Jesus, my situation's gotten worse. It doesn't matter. When I show up, it's going to be fixed anyway. But we get so frustrated when Jesus will come on time is that we'll bail on Jesus. And see, obstacles appear the closer you get. You think that God is actually mad at you because you see like I'm closer than ever. We're watching the story, and I can't believe how advanced 1959 was because it looks old school now. But as soon as he got to the palace, we're all like, just run, Philip. Boom, the thorns. Man. Why does she wait till the last minute? It always happens. The closer you get to your goal, to your purpose, to your plan, the closer you get, the greater the obstacle. He just got through the actual thorns, and here comes a dragon. And he couldn't defeat the dragon by himself. He needed the fairies' help. Sometimes these obstacles get so bad, the closer you get, you won't be able to get there on your own. Y'all still awake? And don't mistake sleep for death. Some of you have some sleepy dreams, stuff that you had in your soul, in your heart for so long, and you think it's dead, but it's just really asleep. And lastly, don't let what could have been rob you what is. We have all kinds of problems with that. You have two choices. You can live every day regretting and trying to change something that you can't change, or you start living now thankful that you still have time. But how many people do you know that have basically sit on life's sidelines because they felt like they missed the bus or missed a turn and they refused to try? So, well, I'm old. Yeah. Thank you, son. I wasn't talking about me, baby. I was just talking. Well, I'm too old to do this. No, you're not. I'm too old for a career change. So you're just going to sit, soak, sour, and die there? Or I'm too old for this. Or I don't have enough money. I don't have enough education. All that is really excuses. It's really just saying what could have been if mom and dad would have done this for me. If I would have got a scholarship. If I would have got this. If I did this. I'd have had to stop living in the past. So I don't know what Meriwether's gift would be. But if she would have gave it, there wouldn't have been a story. So the very thing you think you'd be awesome if you had, there might not be any story of you now. So as you stand with me, I want to see if you'll trust Jesus just one more time. Well, Pastor, I prayed about it, and Jesus is slow. Well, yeah, he said he'd come quickly, and that was a long time ago. I understand. But what's your other option? If Jesus said he'll go with you, well, I just don't see how it's working. I just don't see him. There's a story of a time when the Nazis were bombing London during World War II. The father, holding his small son by the hand, ran from a building that had been struck by a bomb. In the front yard was a shell hole. Seeking shelter as soon as possible, the father jumped in the hole and held up his arms for his son to follow. Terrified, yet hearing his father's voice tell him to jump, the boy replied, "I can't see you." And the father, looking up against the sky, tinted by the burning buildings, called to the silhouette of his son, "But I can see you. Jump." "Pastor, I can't see what God's doing." "I don't care. Jump." "Oh, Pastor, I don't understand. I don't understand what's going on. Stuff's exploding around me. It feels like I'm in the war. It feels like everything is being destroyed and falling around me." Jump. Doesn't matter if you can't see him. What matters is he can see you. Jesus calls us to trust him. We can't see him, but we're not jumping blindly into the dark either. We hear his voice in the word of God. He demonstrates his power over disease and even death. He calls us to put our faith in him so we can be saved. It's funny how we bail on Jesus. We trust him to save us. But when he doesn't answer a prayer for something trivial that we'll forget 1,000 years into eternity, we think he's not faithful. I don't know where you are in this whole Sleeping Beauty story. What's funny is when she was told her destiny by the fairy, she cried. She didn't realize that the stranger she met in the woods was the one that was promised and betrothed to her when she was in the cradle. She was crying over the very thing that she wanted. She thought it was going to turn out different. She lived in the forest for 15 plus years, not realizing that that was only temporary, that she was actually a princess, the only princess, and that there was a kingdom waiting for her return, waiting to celebrate. And she was upset because she thought that she couldn't have this thing in the forest. How many times do we actually bump into our promise and we don't realize what it is? How many times do we cry over something that God is just going to give us anyway? How many times do we get frustrated? I don't know what it'd been like to walk into the castle for the first time. Price, I don't know what it would be. Price, what would you think that all of a sudden you go in the castle and now you're dressed like a princess and you were running barefoot in the forest last 15 years? I can imagine it's overwhelming. But we got a bigger crown than anything Sleeping Beauty ever put on her head. The king that's waiting for us is so much greater than King Stephen and his wife. And what kind of story would be a story that never even named her? It's the only one that doesn't have a name in the whole story. Just the queen. So much in there. But what's important is wherever you are now, this isn't your home. You're destined for a kingdom. You're destined for a kingdom. So I'm talking to some Snow Whites that are all upset because they think they can't get their way. I promise you. See, Prince Philip was going to throw everything away because he doesn't want to marry a princess. He wants to marry the peasant girl he met in the woods. You got two people willing to throw everything away because they don't realize that they actually had what they wanted all along. Why do you say it like that, Pastor? Because we have people that will throw away their walk with God over one thing. So let me ask you, are you dealing with delay? Is your plan and your purpose kind of not matching up? Has fear caused you to do some silly things? I don't know where you are today, but as Todd sings, would you ask God? Would you ask God to actually I'm going to say this way and it's going to offend folks. God, I've been in church a long time, but will you help me to get my priorities straight now? would you help me stop getting so upset over trivial forest things when I'm headed to the kingdom? Would you stop, God, help me stop being content or living a life that's beneath my calling. You're not called to be a peasant. You're called to be in the kingdom. I don't know where you are. But would you ask God if he'll show you? I could have preached 2 more hours on all the points. This story is full of stuff that the Bible shows. It was almost like it was telling us. If you go back and you read and look at the story of Disney, the shield of victory and the sword of the Spirit was given to Philip by the fairies. Doesn't that sound kind of similar to something that's in Galatians? And he defeated the enemy by the things that were given to him that weren't of this world. I don't have enough time to preach on Sleeping Beauty. I don't know if old Walt was trying to make it scriptural, but there's tons of it in there. So Todd, if you'll sing, I believe I'm talking to some people that want to talk to their God. Would you pray? Would you ask God to help you today?